everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Sales Development Podcast. I am super stoked today. I got the CEO and sales tech who was actually an SDR at some point, which is amazing. Evan, how you doing today?
Good. Great to meet you, David. And thanks for having me on. Yes, it can be done. SDR to CEO.
This is crazy. Oh my God, this is such an inspiration. We've got folks who just started out in their career all the way up to, running teams and running companies. So amazing to hear your story. Tell us this. How did you get into this? And what problem are you solving now with the user evidence?
Yeah, so I graduated from Stanford in 2010, and I didn't get any hard skills like coding or anything like that. So I just kind of fell into sales and started as the first SDR, first salesperson at this company called Tech Validate, which was B2B SaaS. And I started learning how to do cold calls and emails, and eventually learned how to sell, and eventually learned how to manage teams, and eventually was running a sales org. And then we sold that startup to SurveyMonkey in 2015, and then I ran enterprise sales for SurveyMonkey for a while. And then in 2020, I started this company that I'm now the CEO and founder of, UserEvidence, with my co-founder, who actually was also an SDR. And so two founders that are SDRs. But the problem, the reason we started UserEvidence specifically, it was actually a sales problem that we had encountered. If you're in sales and you're selling something expensive and high consideration, at some point in the sales process, prospect will ask you, hey, can you show me examples, or can I talk to a reference, or at least see a story from someone you've worked with that looks like me? Same industry, same use case, same problem, same size. And our marketing team always did a great job of like having these like awesome high production, like case, like awesome, like really big case studies. But we sold to like 16 different industries and had 4 different products. So like we just never had specific relevant proof points, and a lot of them to, serve specific segments. So yeah, we had felt that problem as salespeople. And we started now are building a company around, helping B2B companies, create and deliver social proof and customer evidence and customer success stories to their sales team.
That's amazing. And one thing you always hear about is talk to your customers, get the voice of the customer and really, really understand. And it seems tough if you're starting a company, like you don't have any customers,
Yeah,
but
true.
even as you start to get customers, it just seems awkward, to be like, hey, you want to talk? Like, I mean, how do you think about, gathering that information?
Yeah, it is tough. I mean, smaller companies are easier to talk to. So like our first companies were a bunch of startups and Series A companies, and they're generally willing to help out startups and give feedback and even like give testimonials and case studies. But as you sell to bigger and bigger enterprises, especially, you mentioned you were at RSA, which is a big cybersecurity conference. Like if you're a cybersecurity startup selling to big banks like JP Morgan or federal government customers, like it's freaking impossible to get those people to go on the record and talk about what their security infrastructure looks like, and give you success stories and case studies. So there's a way to both get feedback for the purpose of figuring out like how to improve your product, how to improve the customer experience, but also a totally different art on capturing feedback for the purpose of packaging of that feedback up into external facing content and social proof and customer stories. There's friction all around, but there are some clever ways that we've developed to just capture that sort of customer proof at scale, and turn it into usable content.
Oh my gosh. I worked with this guy named Joel at Case Study Buddy.
Oh
And
yeah, I know Joel for
you
sure.
know him?
Yeah,
Yeah, and it was awesome, because we were always like, how do we do this? I feel super awkward like going to
yeah,
asking for this. And he was so good at it. And then he sold the company. But I mean,
yep,
those were like, 2 or 3 grand a pop, so
totally.
especially as a small company. And then as soon as you get the case study, it's outdated, right? So how
Yeah,
do you think about like, I need case studies, man, but where do I get them?
yeah. So like what Joel is really good at, and this is super important, is like these kind of longer format, like higher production value, kind of brand oriented case studies. And you need a few of those like on your homepage to, from your biggest, best logos to kind of communicate that you're, legitimate and you work with big companies and all that. But it's actually, we're doing a deal right now with the largest CRM provider in the world that everyone's familiar with. And you would think that they have no shortage of like brand oriented customer stories, and they don't. But their problem is like they have 27 products that they sell across 17 different industries and 5 different regions and 4 size segments. So you have some rep over there that's like, hey, I need an example where we beat, HubSpot, in a healthcare client in EMEA for
Yeah.
this type of use case. They're like, well, we don't have that, right? So the asset that these companies often have is hundreds or sometimes even thousands of users and customers, but they only tell stories from like a small fraction of them because there's all this friction in the way. So while it is important to have these like high production, high value, like high production stories, you can only create like a handful of those a year. But our question is, how do we leverage and kind of democratize the voice of the much larger other 95% of your customer base that's bought the product and is doing cool things with it? So it's really creating, using all these happy customers to create, social proof and customer evidence and stories at scale. So you have a library of hundreds of these things, so you can go search and filter and find the laser targeted, specific proof point that you need.
Oh man, I want it. Now, I get surveys all the time, right?
Yeah.
Everybody wants like information from me, whether I'm a customer or just like a random person. How do you combat like the ask fatigue, that your customers might have?
Yeah, it's real, and some people don't respond. So
Mhm.
a good response rate on a survey is like 10%, and you may think that sounds bad in theory, but if you're Gong or Pendo or something like that, and you have 10,000 users, that's 1,000 people, right, that are now talking about the value that they've seen with the product, which is a lot bigger N, if you will, than a testimonial, which is an N of one. So if you had a statistical statement that sounds like 87% of Gong customers improved win rates by 17%, that is, and with a study of 438 Gong users, that starts to feel a lot more substantial. So there's ways to like generally improve the participation. If you think about it, like you go out and ask, hey, can you do a case study like that? It communicates like all this work and approvals that sounds really bad and like a lot of work. You're like, no, I don't want to do that. But this is almost more like, hey, can you just like almost like 5 minute, potentially anonymous NPS survey. You can get higher response rates if you deliver it at relevant points in the customer journey. Like, say you just used a feature, that would be the right time to ask how much time did that feature save you, rather than 6 months down the road when they've blast out a random survey. So a lot of our more advanced modern customers, they do a lot of like life cycle based surveying, which might be like in app, or it might be triggered from their CRM at logical points in the customer journey. You can leverage human relationships. You probably ignore the survey, the invite that you get in the inbox. But if I pinged you on LinkedIn and say, hey, David, we really love your feedback. Here's a link again in case you missed it. Yeah, you'd probably be like a lot more likely to respond.
Yeah. And what if you don't have any customers? And like I don't know if you would work with a
Yeah.
company like that, but what if you're like, I think that there's a problem, I have this hypothesis, but I need to go talk to people, what like can you help with that?
Yeah, user evidence doesn't, because our focus is on building evidence from the users, and obviously there's no users,
Mm,
it's not very useful. But
yeah.
having spent a lot of time just around surveys and feedback, and being an early stage founder, that was, everyone's in that scenario, right? At some point, you're not going to have customers, and what do you still want to figure out if what you're building is kind of grounded in some sort of market-based demand and reality. And that can happen through a variety of ways. I think early on, like the one-on-one conversations were some of the most valuable for me. And I framed them as sales conversations. I think if you go out and you ask like, hey, I have an idea, like, can you tell me if it's cool or not? You're going to get a lot of like, yeah, it's super cool. But if you ask people for money, I was like, would you pay 30K for this? And let's assume we build this in 2 months. Like, can you sign a contract that, memorializes that?
Whoa.
You learn a lot more about if people, if you're actually solving a meaningful problem or not. So I think, having
Wow.
one-on-one sales conversations, even with like a lot of the early stuff we sold was just mock-ups and stuff like that. There was no product. It was just, Figma wireframes and stuff like that. But I still got a sense of if I could sell or not, and if we were solving a problem. And then there's more
Wow.
broad-based kind of market research on the other end. For example, Winter is a company that we partner with that does, provides panels. So like we're doing a project right now to basically figure out what messaging to put on our homepage, and we have a few different versions, and they'll provide a panel of 500 product marketers, which is our audience, and we can put these two homepages in front of them and get feedback, at scale through survey research panels. So yeah, a combination of both, more colorful individual interactions where you can follow up and ask questions and dig in, with more broad-based, market research through panels or through sharing a survey with your network. is a good combination of both kind of qualitative and quantitative signal, I would say.
I like that. That's really interesting. I know your sales background is coming out in this conversation because I think a lot of people in your position are engineers. You know,
Yeah.
they're straight up engineers, and they're like the whole go to market thing is like kind of new. You know, and but if you've been an SDR, you're like, you know what, dude, you need to like pick up the phone and call and talk to people.
It's an advantage. I mean, there's
Yeah.
by all means there's disadvantages to having two founders that with no technical experience, and luckily
Mhm.
we found a great first engineer.
Yeah.
But the advantage is that like you are. I'm still with talking to customers and prospects every day. I was actually last week on Friday, I did an hour long cold call block with an auto dialing solution we have called Nooks. And I booked two meetings, and so like I'm still ripping dials. But if you talk to customers and you talk to prospects every day, and that same person or group is also leading product development, guess what? Like everything that you build is going to be delivering revenue because that product roadmap is very much informed by actual conversations with people that are telling you what they want and what they'd pay for.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And just as a side note, did they teach you any sales classes at Stanford?
No, that some side story is like I didn't even know sales was an option. Like back in the time when I graduated in 2010, like if you neglected to actually, take school seriously, your option was like, go into finance and go to McKinsey or Bain or consulting, right?
Yeah.
And I got my suit and I went to an interview and like they grilled me about like the price of like gold and corn futures and crap like that. I was like, this is not for me. And I'm like a surfer from San Diego. I was like, I can't handle the suits. uh, I'm trying to wear some tees. Uh, and
Wow.
then at the time, there was starting to be like a few more examples of like tech startups. So like a dude down the hallway in my fraternity was the co-founder of Snapchat. Another guy down the hall did Robinhood, the stock trading app. And so
Mm.
we had several, and they were all tiny at the time, but like it looked fun. It's like, you're hanging out with your buddies and making stuff. And so that, kind of got me into the startup world.
Okay. All right. I see that. I could see that happening. Now that sounds like not very long ago, but we're talking like 14 years now, right?
Yeah, now
Yeah.
14 years ago. Thank you for reminding us. But
Oh, dude, I've been around longer than that, so don't worry about it. Now, how did you go to start the company in Jackson Hole? If you're from
yeah,
San
so
Diego.
I was just at one point, so I was in San Francisco after Stanford for 8 years. And San Francisco at the time was like the epicenter of it all, right? It was like it's freaking awesome, so fun. After 8 years, like people started kind of, getting married and graduating and moving off and stuff like that. And so we kind of, we were ready to graduate as well. We kind of narrowed. I was running like an 80-person sales org at SurveyMonkey, and then I just transitioned into an enterprise account executive role, made way more money than I ever did as a leader. And it took me like, 20% of my day is easy. So that allowed me to move out to Jack. Yeah, don't tell them. But that allowed me to move out to
Okay.
Jackson. And so I'd be,
Yeah.
snowboarding mostly and, would hear my name on a pipeline call and, oh crap. So sorry, I had you on mute there. Yeah. The HP deal is here. But it was also that was the instance, like it wasn't
Wow.
intellectually stimulating to me at all. It's like it was easy. I could do it in my sleep, which for me as a very intellectually motivated person, like
Yeah.
told me I was like, all right, this is not well fun and cute, not not particularly interesting. And so that I quit the job without even having a plan to start this. I knew I needed to like just clear space to allow other stuff to then come because it was too comfortable.
And did it hit you like a lightning bolt that we need to hear from users and make this problem easier, or did you have a lot of different ideas and this is the one that kind of stuck?
Yeah, I mean, my last company, Tech Validate, was in and around this space as well. And so my
Mhm.
co-founder Ray pinged me with the idea like we should kind of do a next generation version of this. The vision has since shifted away from that, but at the time is like choosing something where you had a decent amount of experience in like felt like a safe way to do what is usually a very risky thing, which is an early stage startup, right? So it felt like a little bit like startup with training wheels. And so we intentionally chose something where we had a lot of selling experience, had a lot of good initial contacts, had a lot of good information around product market fit, which I think, especially as the market now has kind of deteriorated and gotten a little crazier, and like your ideas and execution have to be freaking solid in this market to exist. I've had a bunch of my investments that were great founders and seemed like great ideas that don't exist anymore. And so I'm really glad we chose something that, we knew had worked before and could certainly work again.
Yeah, you've got it all lines up. Now, did you have to invest yourself to get it going, or are there investors
Yeah,
that are okay?
that was kind of an interesting problem because like no one would invest in two sales guys with a deck. They're like, where's the technical
Really?
product team? But we didn't have any money, and no engineer wants to work with people that don't have funding. So
You have a dream.
it's chicken and egg problem. We're like, all right. So we kind of like just did them at the same time. We're like, so we have this engineer, he's ready to go if we can get funding. And to the engineer, we're like, we have funding if you're ready to go. And so we kind of did this at the same time, and we're able to raise some external money, hire the engineer, and get going. But yeah,
Wow.
we didn't have much of our own money to put into it, and since we don't know how to code, like we had to pay an actual engineer. So yeah, we needed outside investment initially for sure.
Wow. Okay, that's a very rare story, and a lot of people think that that happens, but I don't hear that very often. And
Yeah.
you're juggling chainsaws at the same time, so it's really hard what you did.
Yeah, it's a little bit of, the stone soup, right? If you bring everyone together, you can make something, but no one wants to go alone. So you got to kind of create the illusion that everyone's going to be there.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Now, let me ask you this. With the voice of the customer being so important right now, do you find that people are using the product for what you thought they would, or is it morphing in? And where I'm going with this is, for me, when I'm hearing about a product, I want to know who's using it, and are they in the same position as me? Is it the same kind of company and stuff?
Yeah,
And it's like it seems like you could use that in marketing as well, that voice of the customer.
absolutely. Yeah. So our core buyer is actually marketing, and specifically like product marketing and customer marketing that is responsible for
Mm,
creating customer stories and case studies and ROI data and competitive evidence and all that. Yeah, the
mhm.
most important consumer or user of that content is definitely sales teams, right? I think imagine you're a BDR and you just got tasked with trying to generate intro calls in a new industry vertical, financial services, right? And you get, hey, do you work with any other banks? And you're like, I don't know, like not really. Like here's a hospital. Yeah, it sucks, right? So it's like, the sales team feels that pain of not having relevant stories. Actually, interesting. We just did a market research project to create this like state of customer evidence report. So we surveyed 500 buyers, and we also surveyed 500 sellers to get their opinions on like what they what kind of how they view customer evidence when they're evaluating vendors. And the kind of themes from the buyers that are emerging today is like people have a really freaking hard time because there's so much like focus on doing diligence when you choose a vendor and making sure that a vendor is going to deliver strong ROI when budgets are, a little bit more strapped right now. Buyers don't have great confidence when it comes to that ROI narrative. So that means vendors aren't able to give them, compelling substantive evidence and data that proves that they're going to deliver, strong return on investment. So that was one thing that stood out. The
Hmm.
other thing that stood
Wow.
out both from the buyers and the sellers was that in terms of like determining if customer content or content generally is relevant to their scenario, yeah, it's all the normal things you'd expect. Like, is the company the same size, right? State Farm is not a relevant story for me as a Series A startup, right? So it's size, region was in there, use case. Industry was actually the most important for both sellers and buyers in determining if like a customer story was relevant to them. So prospects do want to know that, and they want to see stories from other people that you've worked with that are in their industry. The problem is like if you're selling to 15 different industries and it takes 5 6 months to create a case study from an enterprise customer and you only have a handful, now you have big gaps. You have 12 industries that you don't have storage for, and buyers they want to see that. So that was just another interesting insight that came out from this project.
No, it really is. And I think of being on the receiving end of even prospecting emails. And it's like,
Totally, yeah,
hey, we work with Google, HP, and
yeah, like
frickin' Dell.
cool,
And I'm like,
very
dude,
impressive.
we have four people at this company.
Right, yeah,
Like,
totally.
seriously, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, okay, this is so interesting. Okay, so so if salespeople are listening to this and they want to check it out, would they refer you to their product marketer, or how would it work like if they're like, hey, I need these case studies, where do I go with user evidence?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, product marketing will eventually sponsor it, but yeah, we love talking to salespeople. It's super useful to know because marketers often have, and this is another interesting finding from our research papers, like marketers have a think they're doing better than they are when it comes to delivering content to their sales team. And then if you go ask the sales team, what do you think? They're like, oh man, we have freaking gaps all over the place. Like, don't have good content in different industries. One of the biggest gaps that popped up uh, was a lack of competitive evidence. So, like stories around why people switch from a competitor or what features or benefits that you have that are different. And so, like differentiating, because like what's happening today is like these spaces are getting so crowded as there's more and more startups in a given space, and it's just freaking noisy. There's like 25 vendors in the space. Like, how do you choose? So being able to differentiate versus competition was one of the biggest gaps. But anyway, if you have problems like that, if you're a salesperson, feel free to come to us directly. We will give you resources and stuff like that that you can, use to introduce this to your product marketing or marketing team or customer marketing team. Or yeah, obviously just, send them our way too. But the deals that get done that we do, the sales team is often involved as a noisy cricket that's like, yeah, we actually need this stuff.
We need this. No, I've noticed that over the years that the best salespeople, they kind of make their own playbook. They're sitting in the front at the QBR, during the competitive research section, and they're really good friends with the product marketers and stuff like that.
Yep.
But they don't just sit there and wait for being spoon fed like case studies and stuff. They make their own
That does, and they
playbook.
often like
Yeah.
have their own
Yeah.
tribal kind of stable of their own references,
Yeah.
but newer reps
Rolodex.
will not have access to that,
Mhm.
and which is obviously a problem. So yeah, you're
Yeah.
totally right.
It's interesting because I'm gathering all the sales tech tools onto the Tenbound website.
Mhm.
And as we're thinking about it, it's like, how do we make this easier so you can just go on and go, okay, these are the top three, vendors that serve this particular niche based on your size. And one of the things when I went to RSA, as I came down the escalator, it was Gartner and Gartner with the Magic Quadrant, and it's
Yep,
just like
exactly.
people are so inundated with products and services that it's like just make it easy. Like, what are the top three in the
Yeah.
top section, and save me from all this. So I'm trying to think of what is the best way to help, within our world, like make that easier for people. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, so like particularly in IT security, obviously the analysts, mainly Gartner in that space, are still very well respected and have strong influence. Again, particularly as you have this flight to risk aversion, which usually means we go with like bigger, well-known incumbent vendors that obviously do really well in the analyst reports. But in more garden variety stuff like, sales tech, for instance, if I was going to go choose the right next, call recording software or something like that, I'm not going to go to Gartner to go figure that out from some, older dude that's like has no idea what he's talking about. Like I would go to a place like yours, right, that where I can access essentially, experts and practitioners that actually have, hands-on modern experience with that technology. So it is an interesting trend we're seeing, at least in kind of garden variety, even to extent like more hardcore IT, slightly diminishing influence of analysts and the increasing influence of more peer-based sources of information, which might be communities or review sites or aggregators and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll have a side conversation. We'll hook up after the podcast because maybe there's some way we can use user evidence to make it
Yeah.
easier for people and integrate. So, Evan, this is awesome, man. I think this is a really inspirational for like SDRs and salespeople who look at the entrepreneurial world as it's not like all rose-colored glasses and stuff like
Yeah.
that. I'm sure we could have another podcast on all the challenges, but
Oh yeah.
it's great to see what you're doing, and I'm really excited to check out user evidence.
Yeah, it's fun. I enjoy it. And I think, yeah, the sales background is one of the most important critical skill sets you could have in anything that you do. So glad I was able to put it to use.